the contradictory evidence given to the Alex Salmond inquiry at Holyrood, the Scottish Parliament, grew to monstrous, some would say ridiculous, proportions in the testimony given by the aforementioned first husband. Peter Murrell, his name is, though no one had ever heard him speak before until he appeared at the inquiry. And actually, many now regret ever having heard him. He certainly regrets ever having spoken, because the first thing he did was flatly contradict the sworn evidence given by his wife, the First Minister and leader of the SNP, Nicola Sturgeon. Cards on the table, I have said from the beginning, before the trial, that the SNP conspired to send Alex Salmond to prison for the rest of his life. Just think about that. He said to me in this very building, "We've all been in politics a long time. I sat in Parliament with Alex Salmond for decades. We all know about inner party struggles, but we've never had a situation where your opponents in your own party are trying to send you to prison." Now, Alex Salmond is 66. He would not have survived a sentence of several years in prison if that had been the outcome of his trial. It was not. He was acquitted on all charges, as I always proclaimed that he would be. But that was just the battle, not the war. As many people now know, the SNP were determined to continue the persecution of Alex Salmond, and he was equally determined to hold to account those who had conspired to destroy not his political career, but to destroy his very life. Now, they set up an inquiry, and it's gone nowhere. It's been stonewalled, it's been crab-walked, it has been sabotaged at every turn, but the truth will out. And there are not many people now paying attention in Scotland, at least, who don't believe that there's a cover-up of enormous proportions going on. And of course, we all know, since Richard Nixon and the Watergate, it's the cover-up that brings them down in the end. And I firmly believe, again, full disclosure, I have a dog in this fight. I'm involved in this fight. I've got skin in this fight. And I'll take calls from anyone who thinks differently to what I'm about to say. In fact, they'll be prioritized. So on your marks, get set. The reality is that the SNP does not deserve to continue in governance in Scotland. I don't have time to adumbrate the series of disasters over the coronavirus, over the Nike conference outbreak, which was covered up. And if it hadn't been covered up, there wouldn't have been an international rugby match played at Murrayfield nearby. And if there hadn't been an international rugby match played at Murrayfield in Edinburgh, far fewer people would have caught the coronavirus, and the crisis would not have left Scotland the second worst performer in all of Europe, the second worst, arguably, per million. And bear in mind, Scotland is a huge country with a small population. We ought to have been one of the best. We are actually almost the worst in the entire world. There's the collapse of the Scottish government-owned fabrication yard in the northeast of Scotland, about which more later. There's the fiasco of the ferries. This is Scotland, the country which on the Clyde built great ocean-going liners which sailed the seven seas in the 19th century when the Americans were still cowboys. The sparks of the workshop of the world could be seen on the Clyde in Glasgow, and the manufactures then taken across the world by Scottish-built ships. We've tried to build 2 ferries. They are now years over the date that they were supposed to be fabricated by, and they have cost 5 times the money that was budgeted for them. There's the Sick Children's Hospital in Edinburgh, which has never opened. There's the devastation of the Scottish economy by the play acting of Nicola Sturgeon, with her determination to do anything that Boris Johnson does on a UK level differently. Whether it's likely to be worse does not matter. What matters is that it's different. And so Scotland has a bewildering series of tears of a clown, which make it impossible for commerce, for business, for industry to carry out their normal business. It has devastated the Scottish economy. The divisions created by the hate bill that we discussed here some weeks ago, the divisions caused by a government which has only one task, it seems. Not education, as they promised, that's going down the tubes. Not the health service, I've already told you about the state of that. It has only one purpose: to deepen division on this small island of English-speaking people, pursuant to their only policy, which is to sever Britain along the Scottish-English border. Their goons are out there at that border hurling abuse at English people, whether they're bringing money to spend or whether they are conducting trade, because, of course, more than 60% of Scotland's trade is not with Slovenia or Slovakia, but with the rather closer England and Wales, for that matter. That would all just be a normal week. But here's what happened this week. First of all, the SNP government lectured the heir to the throne and his wife, Prince William and Kate, that they should not have made a journey to Edinburgh, which they did, to thank the National Health Service staff on behalf of the Queen, on behalf of the British state. The scolding would have been demeaning even if it had been right, but it was wrong. Prince William was on a working visit to Edinburgh. A working visit to Edinburgh is perfectly within even the Byzantine laws laid down by Nicola Sturgeon's SNP. Then, this day, they have warned, how's that for lèse-majesté? They have warned Prince Charles and his wife not to come to Balmoral for Christmas, as would otherwise have been their wont. Lèse-majesté, for sure. But how about this one? When Boris Johnson said that the Royal Navy would be deployed to protect British waters in the event of a no-deal Brexit and the ongoing propensity of continental industrial trawlers, some of them firing electronic jolts to stun the fish, the better to hoover them up, that the Royal Navy would be deployed to protect Britain's territorial waters. Now, whatever you think of that as a negotiating tactic, it's abundantly clear, at least to most of us, that Scotland is still in Britain. Therefore, any waters off the coast of Scotland are British territorial waters. In fact, a lot of the fish that have been hoovered, stunned and hoovered, are fish in the Scottish part of British territorial waters. Johnson actually fighting for the interests of Scottish fishermen and the Scottish coastal communities. And therefore, tactically, he said, well, we'll put our Royal Navy ships on alert. Along comes Admiral of the Rear End, somebody called Mike Russell, who's never done a day's work in his life a day's service in his life, wouldn't know one end of a forecastle from another. He announces, not in Scotland you won't. Now, the Scottish Parliament is a devolved assembly. Scotland decided to be a part of Britain, and by a big margin, at a once-in-a-lifetime referendum, just 6 years ago, and now we have an oath, Mike Russell, telling the Royal Navy where it can go and where it cannot. And the British government doesn't say or do that about it. Now, I'm not a royalist. I'm a Republican. Neither am I the greatest cheerleader for recent deployments post-Second World War of the Royal Navy, but I do live in Britain. I am a British citizen. I recognise that we have a British head of state and a British government who've got a navy. As a matter of fact, I helped that navy should be built in Scotland very largely. As the Member of Parliament for the yard that built the frigates, I was forever at the door of Conservative government ministers, encouraging them, you might put it that way, browbeating them, they might have put it, that those frigates should be built on the Clyde. But because I recognise that I do live in the state called Britain, the United Kingdom, I recognise that it has a navy that it can send wherever it wants. And no jumped-up town councillor in an IKEA parliament called the Scottish Shortbread Senate can say or do anything about it. Last point, for I don't want to abuse my platform. I spoke this afternoon to a Scottish haulier who in desperation raised the following with me. He's trying to move by wide load truck a £1.5 million cargo of Scottish manufactured equipment to Southampton and thence to the continent. He was worried about the Brexit deadline, now passed, or rather, now postponed. But he was also worried about the demurrage costs of the ship in Southampton waiting for his load. If his load was leaving from Carlisle, it would have been perfectly proper for him to hire a commercial escort service to guide him down the motorway under government regulations. That would have been the way to do it. But in Nicola Sturgeon's Scotland, only the police can guide you down the dual carriageway until you get to Carlisle. So he tried to book the police. It's a booking, by the way. It's a commercial revenue stream for the Scottish police, which has been centralised, by the way, into one police force. That means there's only one commander that you've got to, well, control if you're the Scottish government. The police must do it. The police earn big money from it. But the police can't do it until after Christmas. Thus, this haulier faces ruin, and the manufacturer of the equipment will never get another order from the European company that ordered manufactured goods made in Scotland. How's that for a government that understands business, understands the need for exports, understands the need for manufacturing? This is an absolute scandal. And I am going to do everything I can in the course of this coming week to bring unbearable pressure to bear on the Scottish Police Scotland. They must make officers available, or they must relinquish their monopoly rights to escort this vehicle from the northeast of Scotland to the Scotland-England border. I tell you that story not just because it's personal to me. but because it sums up in one nutshell the extent to which Scotland is governed by clowns who've never done a day's real work in their life, who've never run a student union coffee stall, who know nothing about business, nothing about industry, nothing about manufacturing, and everything they touch turns to dust, or merde, as the French say. I'll be right back. This is the mother of all talk shows.